is important for us. And that's why I want to point out a third anniversary that we're celebrating today, and this is CAS's presence in Kenya for 50 years. And I'm very proud to be here for this occasion as well. As Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, we have identified 3 themes that we're working on and that is guiding our work in Germany, but also internationally. And let me just mention these 3 areas that are of great concern to us. We are convinced that democracy needs participation. Furthermore, prosperity needs innovation, and freedom needs security. And let me just comment briefly on the first aspect. Democracy needs participation, because I think we have worked on this topic over the last couple of years, also with our partners here in Kenya, because cooperation obviously is not a one-way street, and we see a rising and a great interest also from the German political side in entering into a deeper dialogue with our partners here in Kenya. And as the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, we work very closely with political parties and also with members of parliament, with members of the Kenyan parliament and members of the German Bundestag. And here I'm very happy also to see the development on the German side, the need to enter a stronger dialogue. And this is also shown in a strategy paper that is being put out by our party group in the German Bundestag, formulating a new strategy for a new partnership in the cooperation with our African partners, and where I think the main message will be trade, not aid. So entering also and strengthening economic cooperation with our African partners, including with Kenya. Let me briefly also touch on the aspect of participation, and I see a number of young people in the room this morning, and also female leadership representation. And that's a topic that is extremely important to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, because democracy obviously can only work if different and all groups of society are included in the political process. We believe in strong political parties, and democracy requires the participation of the different groups. And I think we have a panel this afternoon also on female involvement and leadership in politics. And I think this is also where we have to look at Germany and also our political party. I think there is room for improvement. So perhaps that's also a topic that we can work on jointly in Kenya and also in Germany to empower a little bit youth leadership, but also female leadership in politics. Yeah, let me finish my opening remarks by saying a word of gratitude and thanks. And here are a lot of partners of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in the room. And I think if you look at the different partners, you see that we work with different groups within Kenya. First and foremost, I would like to thank the representatives of the government and the governmental institutions, of the political parties, but also civil society organizations that are key to our work, also on the regional and local level, but also the private sector and the representatives of the academia and the media. It is important for us that we work in partnership with our partners, because I think only jointly we can come to joint achievements. And I also want to underline that here in Kenya we're working across the political spectrum, and this is also an important aspect, I think, in democracy, to work with all democratic forces. A sincere thank you to all of you. I'm looking forward to a fruitful debate and to learn more about Kenya as a nation and what your vision is for the next 60 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Caroline Kanta, the Deputy Director for the European and International Cooperation at the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in Berlin, and that is where the headquarters are. And now I would like to invite the Ambassador of Germany to Kenya, Ambassador Sebastian Groth, to come give us his remarks. A round of applause for him, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, and good morning, or as we say here in Kenya, hamjambo. First of all, I would like to welcome our 3 female Kenyan government representatives, which is impressive. Mercy Vanjau, the PS Parliamentary and Legislative Affairs, and the PS Education. Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us. I would also like to welcome, of course, Dr. Schwantner and Ms. Kanter, who made the long way from Berlin. And thank you for setting up this conference. I think this is a very special birthday present, both to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, because you celebrate the 50th anniversary. And I can say you from my personal experience, the 50th anniversary is a special day. Of course, to the Republic of Kenya, because you're celebrating 60 years of independence this year. It's a special year, I think, also for German and Kenyan relationships. You know that we were the first to recognize independence. We have the 1 CD number plate. Some of my colleagues already approached me and asked me to change, but we will never do this. We are very proud to have the 1 CD 1K on our cars. I think it's a proof of the roots of this relationship and how far it goes. As was said earlier, I think Kenya made an impressive development over the last 6 decades since independence, a vibrant political life that is nurtured by the political interest, I think, of the people here in this country. You hardly see a Kenyan without a newspaper or without a smartphone checking news. You can talk, that's my experience, to any Kenyan or from all walks of life, a driver, a waiter, a teacher, a doctor, and after 3 sentences, you are into politics. And this is very fascinating. And I think this is a basis also for this dynamics that we have here in this country. But you not only have the people, you also have the institutions that grew in the last 6 decades, that are resilient. I think we have seen this during the last elections also. The High Court, the judiciary, the parliament, all the other institutions that play such an important role, but also the political parties that are growing stronger. And this is also due to the work of our political foundations here, not only the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. We have a whole family from Germany that is present here in Kenya. And I think that helps also to consolidate the political landscape in this country. So there is this solid basis, but there are also challenges, of course. And we have seen this in the last years, when we look back to 2007, also when we look back only 4 or 5 months ago, where we had demonstrations and also police reactions and a number of deaths in the streets. So there's always the risk of fragility and violence, as in every country, including in Germany. But my feeling is that the sense of we don't want to risk what we achieve politically and economically is still very strong, and that is rooted in a very strong civil society also, in a good functioning media, even if this is under pressure economically and sometimes even politically. But that all in all, the democratic fabric of this country is very, very healthy and very stable. There's one thing also that is quite important. I think that's the new constitution from 2010 and the idea of devolution, of decentralization, which is very dear to us in Germany because we live also in a federal state. We have 16 so-called Bundesländer. You have 47 counties. And I think that this devolution brought a sense of accountability and management in the, let's call it periphery, beyond the big cities, which is very, very important because it brought a lot of development in terms of health, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of education. I'm fully aware there's still a long way to go, but I think that the direction, the general direction that was taken in 2010 was the right one and is benefiting also the citizens here in this country. Germany is, as I said in the beginning, a long-standing friend and partner of Kenya. I think one element of this partnership is, of course, the development cooperation. And as you might know, there is a working group between the deputy president and the big donors that will convene shortly. And we were asked to put together all the projects that we have in the pipeline, so that are actually up and running right now. And we were surprised ourselves, because if you put all the figures together, the number is 1.5 billion euros. I don't know how much it is in shilling, but it's a lot. It's really a lot of money, but it's not only a lot of money, it's a lot of work on the ground, a lot of work in the country. And we have three main pillars of our cooperation here. That is climate and energy, agriculture, and youth and education and TVET. And if you compare these three pillars of development cooperation also with the priorities of the government, you will see that the overlap is 100%. I think this is exactly also according to the priorities of the government. So this also shows the sense of partnership and common understanding that we share where our support is needed and where it makes the best sense. And I just want to give you a few examples. So for example, in the field of energy and technology, Germany is supporting 470 megawatts of green power generation capacity, mainly in Olkaria, but also we are looking for other places to tap in this green energy. We have provided technical support to 1.1 million farmers in Kenya to boost yields, improve irrigation, and to draw up business models for small-scale agricultural enterprises. We also identified, together with the president and the relevant ministries, the field of green hydrogen as a new field of concrete cooperation. For us in Germany, green hydrogen is the future of a sustainable and environmental friendly industrialization, because it's the only form of industrial value creation without emitting CO2. And Kenya has a vast potential to produce green hydrogen, not so much for the European market because it's too far away, but for its own use, be it in green fertilizer or be it as hydrogen for shipment. And we are in very, very constant contact both with German companies, with German development banks, but also with the Kenyan partners to see how to implement as soon as possible a very concrete project in this field. We are also very active in the vocational education program, in the TVET, and we built up 7 centers of excellence in TVET in the first phase of a very big project, and in the second phase we will help the government to set up a network of 50 to 60 TVET institutions all over Kenya in order to facilitate education for the younger generation and bring them skills so that they can find a good job. In the field of higher education, because the PS is here, we celebrated 50 years of the German academic exchange service just 6 weeks ago. And the General Secretary was here of the DAAD, and he told us that in the last 50 years, 18,000 Kenyan students benefited from scholarships from Germany, including the actual president, who had a scholarship in botany and studied here in Nairobi, and still, I think, is remembering this time very positively. So on the political level, I think we have reached a stadium of dialogue and understanding that probably we haven't had so far. The Chancellor Scholz, as was said earlier, was here in Kenya in May. President Ruto was in Berlin in March, and we are very hopeful that he will visit Berlin again very, very soon. Both leaders met 6 times in the last 15 months. That means a physical meeting every 2 to 3 months, which is, I think, between a European leader and an African leader, really one of the busiest meeting schedule that you might find. We are very much looking forward also to deepening still our relationship, and this is mainly in the field of energy and climate. We are heading towards COP28. Kenya organized a very, very successful African Climate Summit that Germany supported from the very beginning. But I think now it's also time to turn the page and look what we can do together in the field of loss and damage, in the field of green technology, in the field of renewable energy, and both the governments are already in close contact to prepare together a common agenda also for COP28. So I think Transforming a Nation is an excellent title. It's also a very big title for today's conference. And it's, of course, mainly the responsibility of the people living in this nation. So it's your responsibility. You are the younger generation, and you are some of the brightest of this younger generation. Otherwise, Konrad Adenauer Foundation wouldn't have chosen you to be part of this network. The only thing that I can assure you is whenever or whatever Germany can do something to support you in the transformation of this nation, we are at your side, and we are looking very much forward to the next 60 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Groth, for those remarks. And indeed, 50 years of German relations in Kenya is quite the feat. It's half a century, if we're going to put it even in better terms. Now, ladies and gentlemen, allow me invite Mr. Simek Ondrej, who is the Deputy Head of Mission, Delegation of the European Union to Kenya, to come give his remarks. A round of applause for him.
Thank you very much. Members of the government, members of the parliament, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today and to address this important conference on behalf of the European Union in Kenya. Conference which creates an opportunity to take stock of what Kenyans have achieved, what they can be proud of, but also what lies ahead, what opportunities there are to steer the transformation of this country as it continues to stride forward. Kenya has enjoyed 60 years of independence since 1963. It is a short time, considering that in 1929, the first evidence of the presence of ancient early human ancestors in Kenya was discovered by Louis Leakey, who unearthed 1,000,000-year-old Acheulean hand axes, which inscribed Kenya in world history as a cradle of humanity. But 60 years is also a long time for a child that was born in 1963 and that now has reached its retirement age. And as we saw at the beginning, we have one of those children here today to share their views with us on the trajectory that Kenya has followed on the path of transformation. I personally have been in this country for only a few months, but it is clear to me that since independence, Kenya has seen generations that have been struggling to build a nation to which others today look as beacon for democracy and stability, a nation with an immense spirit of entrepreneurship, a nation that leads at the international scene for creating solutions and hopes for a joint future. and a nation that continues to produce the best marathon runners in the world. The European Union opened its first delegation in Kenya in 1977. We have been a close partner of the country in many areas, really across board: economic development, human and social development, governance and democracy, peace and security, humanitarian assistance, you name it. We have been a close partner because we are alike in many areas. We don't have the same good marathon runners in Europe as Kenya has, but we do believe in similar values of equal rights, equal value, and democracy. We have a similar outlook on the world we live in, and we want to work together to do our part in shaping it together as we continue to move forward. It is almost impossible, certainly for me, to imagine how the picture of Kenya has changed since 1963. The nation transformation effort is not something that happens overnight. It is really an endless and sometimes faithless process, with its ups and downs, with its successes and failures, with its highs and lows. My own country, the Czech Republic, was created in 1918. But with the Second World War and the post-war colonization by the Soviet Union, it really has had less than 60 years to pursue its own vision of transformation and development. And that process, just like here in Kenya, continues in the Czech Republic as much as in other countries of the European Union. And this, in my opinion, creates a great opportunity for learning from one another. Learning how to strengthen our respective democracies, how to make our institutions strong enough to maintain direction regardless of political change, how to strengthen accountability and transparency, how to ensure that transformation works for all, men and women, people in cities and in rural areas, those with high incomes and low incomes. It creates an opportunity for learning how to build what the Austrian British philosopher Karl Popper called the open society, a space where everybody in the society is able to help shape the transformation that we're discussing here today. In the European Union, we have been reminded of the value of working together and across borders with the Russian aggression towards Ukraine. It reminds us that we must make every effort to build close and reliable relations with our neighbors and with the rest of the world, to ensure that the core principles that guide our own transformation in Europe, but that guide, I think, also the transformation here in Kenya, are not destroyed. The value of a strong multilateral cooperation is also true for the area of climate and environment, and I'm very pleased that the ambassador mentioned that earlier. This is truly the most significant challenge that we face today in the world. This is an area where Kenya stands out, area where Kenya offers a living example of viability of energy transition, area where Kenya pushes others to make progress. Kenya is much more advanced in many areas than the EU is, and we can learn from you. It is an area where the partnership and cooperation between EU and Kenya is particularly important. The EU today supports Kenya towards amplification of production and access to renewable energy, to protection of watersheds, modernization of agriculture to become better adapted to climate change. Kenya is leading the way for climate finance, sustainable tourism, and is leading Africa to raise its voice globally. I say this as an example of how transformations of nation can be steered. They do not just happen. They are a result of democratic and transparent processes, tirelessly pushed forward by people who have one common vision of where the nation should go, even if they may disagree how to get there. We built our nations bearing the future in our hands. Who can imagine what Kenya will look like in 60 years from now? There will be a next generation growing up with their own ideas, their own aspirations. But there are things that we know for sure. If we keep our spirit of cooperation alive, based on facts, on research, and with an open mind, we can address almost any challenge at home and in the world. We can do this together. This is why this conference is very important, and I'm convinced that it will leave us with new reflections, knowledge, and also friends. And I wish all of you a good working spirit ahead. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for those remarks as well. And now, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to invite to the stage a representative who is here on behalf of the Deputy Governor of Nairobi City County. And he was meant to be here, but due to other circumstances, he was not able to make it. That is the Deputy Governor of Nairobi County. In his place, we have Dr. Anastasia Yalita, who is the County Executive Committee member for Public Participation, Inclusivity, and Customer Service. A round of applause for her as she represents our Deputy Governor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting the Nairobi City County, who is your host county, for this event. Chief guest is Sergeant Gabadi, Honorable PS's presence. I see the first daughter of the Republic. Organizers of the event. Thank you for inviting us, Dr. Annette. I know I've sent you an invitation for next Wednesday. We hadn't met before. Very excited to be here, and I really made sure that the county is represented. My name is Dr. Anastasia Nyarita. I'm the county, can call it county minister for inclusivity, public participation, and customer service. And in that, we have public participation, citizen engagement, which is very important for democracy. We have the corporate brand of the city county, but also more important is city culture, arts and tourism. And as you're all aware, Nairobi City was just recently rated #1, best place to visit, the best city to visit. We take that with a lot of gratitude, and we're doing whatever it takes to ensure that we maintain that and even make it even a better place. Allow me to bring the greetings from His Excellency, the Governor of Nairobi, Governor Sakaja. He's out of the country, unfortunately, he was not able to make it. I know he was invited. Deputy Governor as well, Mushiri was not able to come. But as county ministers, we duly represent our leadership whenever they're not able to attend. As you very well know, I don't know how many of you are in Kenya or Nairobi for the first time. Yeah? I hope you have experienced the warmth of the city, and we won't discover that, as I said again. Yeah, very important. Nairobi is one of the 48 governments, one nation. Yeah, we contribute 10% of the total population. But in terms of GDP, it's more than 40% for the country. But more important, Nairobi is a hub. Not only is it the capital city of the country, but also the hub for the region, the hub for Sub-Saharan Africa especially. But more important also, it is from Nairobi, you can reach the rest of the world at the best connectivity times from 8 hours, 4 hours, and so on and so forth. As a county, we are very committed to partnerships, and this is why we had to ensure that we do come and welcome you guys to the city county, but also to forge the relationships and also tell you what we do. Yeah, we do a lot of stuff. I know I've invited a lot of you for the partnership roundtable, which is happening next week on Wednesday 15th, and I'm hoping to see a lot of you there so that we can tell you, what are the things we're planning as a county and where can you as a partner, collaborate. And that's the reason I also ensured that Konrad is on board. Of course, in terms of economy, we're a growing economy. Nairobi again stands, we're the top, we're, the center of the economic growth of the country. In terms of fintech, technology, in terms of workforce, in terms of culture, and so on and so forth. So mine is just to welcome you to the city. I want to also encourage you as you engage in the next 2 days to also experience what Nairobi City has to offer, both the day life, the night life, and also make sure you visit the city, the National City Park. It is the only city in the world with a national park in its environment. So with that, allow me just to say welcome to Nairobi, feel at home, enjoy what the city has to offer, and I wish you all the very best on behalf of His Excellency the Governor and his Deputy and also the Executive of the Nairobi City County. I wish you all the best in the deliberations, and I want to thank you once again for inviting us, and also want to say I have a very special connection with Berlin and a special connection with Germany, having worked for Bayer Pharmaceuticals for the last 12 years before I joined the county government of Nairobi. So thank you very much, and I really, really want to ensure that we connect and make Nairobi work. Asanteni sana. Thank you.
A bigger round of applause for her. She also represents Nairobi County's female leadership. I think she does deserve a bigger round of applause. Thank you so much, Dr. Nyalita. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to invite the Secretary to the Cabinet here in the Republic of Kenya, Honorable Mercy Wanjao, to come give us her remarks. A round of applause for her as she makes her way here.
His Excellency Dr. Musalia Mudavadi, the Prime Cabinet Secretary, PS Beatrice Inyangala, PS Higher Education and Research, PS Aurelia Rono, PS Parliamentary Affairs, Honorable Dindi Nyoro, other members of Parliament present, Mr. Simek Ondrej, Deputy Head of Mission, Delegation of the European Union to Kenya, Sebastian Groth, Ambassador of Germany to Kenya, Caroline Kanter, Deputy Director for European and International Cooperation, First Headquarters, Dr. Annette Schwabner, Country Director, First Kenya, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am very delighted to join you here today at this conference, which brings us together to deliberate on how all Kenyans can benefit from democracy and economic transformation. I also take note that this conference because of our country's independence, and Konrad Adenauer Stiftung had also just turned 50. This is a great moment, and I liked the reflections that we had at the beginning. And when the gentleman who turned 60 spoke, I thought, the 50s and the 60s are the start of magical times. It's life-changing. It's soul-shifting. You're allowed to do things you wouldn't ordinarily have done. Is that not so? Perspective modifying. There are even senior discounts that come with it. It's a great moment. So here's to celebrating our milestones as we grow older, as we look forward to great moments together. In Kenya, the utmost priority for CAS has been the promotion and consolidation of democracy, which has in turn contributed immensely to our political development over the year. We look forward to that collaboration as we continue to ride on the steady foundation that has been built over the past 50 years. I wish to now turn the lens to the thematic area that is going to be discussed this morning, leapfrogging through technology and economic development in Kenya. In recent years, Kenya has made significant strides in embracing technology as a catalyst for growth. As we look forward to the future, the potential for leapfrogging in various sectors, I would say, is more promising than ever. It would then be fair to say that the future does indeed look bright because Kenya aspires to be a digitally transformed country. The fifth administration, in its bottom-up economic transformation agenda, otherwise referred to as BETTER, has identified technology as a cornerstone and as an anchor of the 5 priority areas. The others are agriculture, micro, small, and medium enterprises, the housing and settlement, and healthcare. The dedicated focus on these 5 priority areas is intended to achieve the administration's vision of making Kenya a middle-class country in every sense of the word. In other words, achieving economic development for all. I was very delighted to hear from the 60-year-old gentleman that the standards of living have improved dramatically in the 60 years, but indeed, quite a lot still needs to be done. I see technology as an enabler. I see technology as an anchor that sits at the nexus of achieving the vision of this administration. It will continue to serve as a cornerstone to drive innovation, foster economic growth, and ensure sustainable development. It is therefore imperative to recognize how this leapfrogging phenomenon can directly influence the 5 priority areas that have been outlined by this administration as the path to progress. The reality of this possibility of exercising and experiencing the 4th industrial revolution enables the confidence in making this statement today. So let's look at agriculture. Agriculture is the cornerstone of our economy. Food security is necessary for stability, and the implementation of cutting-edge technologies such as precision farming, satellite imaging, digital soil mapping can revolutionize the way that we produce food. By leveraging these tools, we can enhance agricultural productivity, optimize resource allocation, and ensure sustainable farming practice, and in this way, improve livelihoods of our farmers and boost agricultural sector contribution to the overall economy. This transformation that I speak of is not a thing of the future. It's actually happening, and I'll share an example. I recently learned of the work of Apollo Agriculture, a technology company based in Kenya, which empowers farmers by turning their farms into successful businesses and thus providing them a pathway to the middle class. They do this by supporting the farmer in purchasing their items on credit. How does this happen? This is powered by Apollo's machine learning credit models. And using these models that are powered by artificial intelligence, the farmers who purchase on credit also receive insurance to protect their investment from unexpected circumstances. The work of this company confirms that it is possible to slowly and steadily begin to change the narrative of the agricultural sector in this economy. I'll move on to healthcare. Sir Winston Churchill aptly captured it when he said, "Healthy citizens are the greatest asset any country can have." In the health sector, leapfrogging through technology has the potential to transform delivery of medical services and improve healthcare access for all Kenyans. Kenya has invested in telemedicine, digital health records, mobile health applications, and all these have contributed to bridge the gap between the urban and the rural area healthcare facilities. It has contributed to provide remote healthcare consultations, to enhance disease surveillance, and ultimately ensure that every citizen receives timely and quality healthcare services. I'm very pleased to inform you today that we are making steady steps in this regard through the creation of a secure and centralized health data system that allows for better monitoring of health records, disease outbreaks, and healthcare resource allocation, as was envisaged in the Digital Health Act 2023, which, for those who attended October 20th, was passed into law just about 3 weeks ago and was launched in Kericho. Let's look at the MSMEs. The medium, small, and medium enterprise sector accounts for about 80% of the jobs in Kenya. Leapfrogging in this area can empower these enterprises to provide them with digital tools for efficient management across wider markets through e-commerce platforms and streamline financial services through digital payment solutions. What would that mean for an MSME who has had an encounter with technology? It would enhance their productivity, expand their customer base, and promote overall growth, and this way foster a more inclusive and resilient economic landscape. Partnerships with entities such as the MasterCard Foundation are working to bring more MSMEs into the digital economy. MasterCard is leveraging on technology innovations and solutions beyond payments to help them get paid, to access capital, to get digital, to be safe and secure wherever they are. I believe so far you begin to see the color of technology, the possibility of technology. Let's look at housing and settlement. The housing and settlement sector represents a fundamental pillar of societal development, directly impacting the living standards and the well-being of Kenyans. Through the adoption of innovative technologies in construction, such as prefabricated building materials, sustainable energy solutions, we can address the housing deficit, improve infrastructure development, and promote eco-friendly and affordable housing options for all Kenyans. This is a sector, an area which is having a lot of robust activity as we speak, and it is going to lead to the creation of vibrant and sustainable communities and enhance the quality of life that will foster social and economic stability across the nation. Kenya is slowly joining the league of countries employing green or environmentally friendly sustainable architecture in real estate development. With Kenya having positioned itself as a leader in climate change management, it is envisaged that as we advance the housing agenda, it will be undertaken in a manner that embraces green technology. Over and above the 5 sector priority areas identified by the government, we cannot overlook the impact of technology on education, and I'm glad that the PS is here, and I'm sure we will hear a lot more about that. In a rapidly evolving world, our young people must be equipped with the necessary digital skills that will enable them to thrive in the job market. By integrating technology in our educational system, we can ensure that our youth are prepared for the demands of the modern workforce. This, in turn, will not only reduce unemployment rates, but also contribute to the overall growth of our economy. This is the only way for Kenya to reap from its youth dividend. I think of areas such as revenue raising. As they say, money makes the world go round, and revenue in a country enables development and sustains the thrust to achieve. The need to raise revenue, to consolidate revenue through transparent platforms is a critical need for any country. Kenya has deployed the e-citizen services in the last 10 years, and for the last 1 year, we have encountered tremendous growth. The e-citizen service currently has upwards of 16,000 services. It's a formidable platform that will anchor revenue assurance for this country. We are currently on the home run towards the target of 30th December, directive target to onboard services for Kenyans. This incremental growth, in my view, is a demonstration of the classic case of leapfrogging, from 397 services in January to 5,087 in June, and currently upwards of 16,000. The commitment is to position the e-citizen platform to catalyze economic development through technology, to enable Kenya's development through platforms of enhanced transparency of revenue collection. Let me take the opportunity to once more stress the need for all government agencies to comply with this deadline as we seek to achieve a common goal of revenue assurance and sustainability. Even as we embrace technology, we must not forget to address the digital divide. Not everyone in this country has equal access to technology, and it's imperative that we work together towards bridging this gap so that nobody is left behind. By investing in reliable internet infrastructure and promoting digital literacy programs, we can ensure that every Kenyan has the opportunity to benefit from the advancements that are rapidly being made in technology. It is for this very reason that the government has committed to lay 100,000 kilometers of the digital superhighway by 2027. As I end, there's a Swahili proverb that says, penye nia, pana njia. This means where there is a will, there is a way. Yes, leapfrogging through technology and economic development is possible, and this is actually the very right time. Yes, Kenya can become a middle-class country in every sense of the word, but we must be ready to do the work. We must be willing to leave old ways of working that no longer serve us. We must be willing to embrace new ways of working, to reach out for collaborations that are mutual, that will lead us to our intended vision. Yes, indeed, it is time to leapfrog. Thank you.
We can do better. We can do better with our hands. A big round of applause for Honorable Mercy Wanjau, and thank you so much for such profound remarks that sort of anchor us into our next segment. And I would like to request our technical team to kindly come move this podium to allow us to have our panel discussion. And as the team make their way here, I'm just going to transition to a handheld microphone just to allow for them to move the podium away. All right. Can you hear me at the back with the microphone? Okay, great. So leapfrogging through technology and economic development is a conversation we are now going to have. You know, when I was preparing for this session, I said to myself, you know, let me get all my numbers right, because the panel we're going to have here this morning are some of the best economists we have in the country today. And I said, you know what, but what's the point? You know, so I'm going to put together numbers on inflation. I'm going to put together numbers on, you know, the depreciation of the Kenya shilling. And I'm going to put together numbers around economic development percentages. But why do I have to do this when we have people who are going to speak to us directly about Kenya's economy and the economic development side of it? So, leapfrogging through technology and economic development. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me invite to the stage our panel that consists of none other than Honorable Ndindi Nyoro, who is the Member of Parliament, Kiharu constituency, and he's also the chair for the Budget and Appropriation Committee. A round of applause for him. And we also do have Mr. Kwame Owino, who is the Chief Executive Officer, the Institute of Economic Affairs here in Kenya. A round of applause for him as they make their way to the stage as well. We also do have Dr. or Professor Dr. He abbreviates his first two names, XN Iraki, who is from the University of Nairobi Business School. A round of applause for him as well. And my name is Joy Doreen Bira. We were expecting Mr. Fanuel Kidenda, who is the Chief Executive Officer for the Kenya National Commodities Exchange, but because he's not able to make it to the panel, we are going to have still a great conversation this morning. So I would like to begin by posing the question, because later today we are going to be having the State of the Nation address, which is very important, and which is why I believe these three gentlemen, we will be trying to have this conversation, not really in a rush, but to make sure that it is a conversation that we have that is extensively exclusive, to allow you also go participate in what would be commentary on various levels after the State of the Nation address. And so without further ado, gentlemen, good morning, and it's great to have you here with us as we have this conversation. My first question to ask is really about the state of the economy, so that we can tap into it and it can usher us into the conversation on leapfrogging through technology and economic development. So, what is your assessment of the current state of Kenya's economy today? If I might start with Kwame.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot, and I'm glad to be here. Well, I think we know the state of the economy is in flux, right? So we said the state of the economy last year at a similar time. It was certainly much better than it is now. But last year at a similar time, anybody who was alive and understood and was looking at the right signals knew that a storm was brewing. In the sense that first, there's an expectation that inflation, which had started to go up, was going to continue to rise. I think that came. Fourth, we had a transition government, and one of the things that was clear was that the debt burden and the fiscal implications of that would show. That too has happened. And what we didn't know yet, of course, was that we were going to have this flood of rains, which is happening right now. So I think there's a confluence of factors, some of it bad luck, some of it the results of bad policy choices that had been made earlier, which makes this a moment to reflect quite a bit. It's a little hopeful because, of course, today inflation, for the moment, is a little higher than it's been before. It's a little lower than it was in May. And part of that was, of course, inflation in Kenya is driven by two things. One, mostly driven by two things. One, fuel costs, which is imported, and food costs, part of which is imported and part of which is dependent on agriculture. So if you've had 4 consecutive years of poor harvest because of poor rains, then obviously that feeds over into food prices. And then if you decompose inflation by housing, I mean by the income for households, obviously the bottom level households, while inflation peaked at about 10%, bottom level households had their inflation at close to 30% on account of the fact that poorer Kenyans spend 60% of their income buying food. So if the price of food has gone up and the price of fuel, which is also used to process it, then obviously that has a double whammy. Those at the top of the pyramid, I mean, those at the top of the income spectrum obviously had lower inflation at the household level because of the kind of stuff they purchase, but also the aims to pay for next year. And then, of course, soon after that, it comes from the pressure of of payment of external debt to domestic debt. And then there's a question, finally, as I conclude, about the depreciation of the Kenyan shilling. That as well is not a surprise, to be honest. If you're alive and watching signals, the proper signals, it was clear that the Kenyan shilling was going to have to depreciate. How much? Nobody could tell. And so I conclude by saying that some of the stuff is within our control, but some of it is outside. I think if the Middle East continues to get turbulent, then obviously there'll be an overflow here, which will not be welcome. And we cross our fingers that that doesn't happen. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I now hand it over to Honorable Ndindi Nyoro to give us his assessment of the current state of the economy.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Joy, and thank you very much, Konrad, for having us this morning. And thank you for calling us together with these very able panelists. I would say from where I sit, we are much better than last year, and especially on several parameters. One, you could say that the path is smooth, but you need to see where the path is leading. A smooth path that leads to hell is much worse than a bumpy one that leads to a better place. So last year it may seem like things were better, but what was insinuating that things were better One, I want to look at the policies that were there then, and especially looking at the policies around subsidies, for example, fuel. Yes, on one side you could argue it's better because the prices are lower, but towards where? You cannot manage an economy artificially for too long. Therefore, on that front, I don't think we were in the right direction last year. I believe, yes, now, things may be tight, and we may have to tighten our belts slightly for the time being, but the direction of the economy is what we need and we desire. Because we believe, after tightening the belts the way we are doing now, the steps we are making, however small, are in the right direction. On the second front, I would say we are much better in terms of parameters, because I want to look at the economy two-sided. One in terms of economic parameters, but also in terms of GDP in the pocket. Because many times, people like us here in the panel who are on that side of the economy in terms of profession, sometimes we talk about parameters only, and then we forget these parameters mean something to people. And therefore, I want to divide it in two ways. On the parameters front, because these are not figures that I make as the Adenauer or government. On the parameters front, I want to look at two things: economic growth and inflation, and also debt. In regards to inflation, I think it's easier because Kwame has already talked about it. Last year's inflation at a time like this was almost headed to double digit. Currently, our inflation is around 6.8%. In fact, last month it was 6.7%. The Kenyan economic benchmark that we set for ourselves in terms of the inflation is 5%, then with a band of 2.5 either side. And therefore, it is between 2.5% to 7.5%. Currently, at 6.8%, we are within our own targets, which we were not within that band last year. On the side of the other parameter, which is the economic growth, this room, when I look around, I have seen almost everyone here has a smartphone. And therefore, it will not be very hard to get information. Not Kenyan information, but also from World Bank, from IMF. We are in year 2023, and I want to implore upon all of us to look for the data itself, that Kenya in the first quarter grew by an average of 5.3%. First quarter of 2023. In the second quarter, the data is just out, we grew by 5.4%. If you look at all the economies of the world, in those 2 quarters, Kenya was actually the 29th fastest growing economy in the world. Those are facts. I'm not generating them now because you can actually fight them. And the other parameter, of course, is debt. Debt, in terms of the economy, you may use to measure debt in terms of the absolute, but it is more advisable to measure debt subject to something. Because even as when you're going to borrow money in a bank, you don't just go to borrow an absolute figure. You borrow money based on some parameters around yourself. And therefore, in terms of debt, it is more prudent to measure debt as a factor of GDP. If you look, for example, at the deficit side of the debt, because deficit accumulated is what then becomes public debt. Last year when we came in, a time like this, our deficit to GDP ratio, our deficit to GDP was actually around 7.2%. When we came on board, we reduced that in our first supplementary, and currently as we talk, the budget that we are implementing, we are at 4.4% deficit to our GDP. So in terms of parameters, it is good. But also because I live in Kenya, I have to admit that there are several points of improvement that we could have. Because an economy that grows in terms of parameters must be felt in the pockets. And one of the predicament or the hindrances of that, number one is inequality. We may have an economy growing, but growing in some certain sectors, probably not touching so many people. And therefore, in that regard, Joy, I believe we have a room to improve in terms of creating a more egalitarian society, a more equal society, and I think we are headed there. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for trying to convince us, but I believe in the second round of questions, where I'm sure the audience is going to think otherwise. Prof, I would like to hear your thoughts as well.
Good morning, all of you. I think you have no doubt from his presentation why he is a second term MP. There's no doubt, and he's going to be there for that term. And yes, that's my prediction, which is usually correct. I think I don't want to be able to spend a lot of time repeating what my colleagues have said, that the Kenyan state of the Kenyan economy is different, and it depends on who you talk to. If you're an affluent Kenyan who has a lot of savings in the bank or in assets, I don't think you realize that the Kenyan economy is that bad. And I want to give you a good example this morning. I used the expressway from Westlands, and I got out around Bunyara Road. And we spent a lot of time waiting to pay for the toll. And being the economist and the researcher I am, I was very happy because I could see the board of the people using ETC. I was paying cash. And one of the things that surprised me is the amount of money Kenyans have on the toll card. I saw somebody with 18,000, 15,000, and there was one guy with 114 shillings. So it depends on who you ask how the economy is doing. But I think we should look at the Kenyan economy from the perspective of the people we voted for, or who voted for this government, the hustlers. And I think we should have one of them here to tell us how they are feeling. I am an economist, but if I want to know how the economy is doing, I don't look at GDP data. I talk to my kinyozi and my taxi driver. Those are the people who tell you how the economy is performing. No doubt debt is a problem. No doubt inflation is a problem. But I think what we should be talking about or asking has taken us this far. I think they are both internal and external issues. But I want us to spend more time asking what next. I think we know our problem, no question about it. Even if you're not a Kenyan, you know the Kenyan economic problems. But as an economist, this is my suggestion. In 60 years, we have had a lot of crises and we have overcome them. And there's no reason why we are not going to overcome them. We had COVID-19. Can you believe we don't talk about COVID-19 today? The government came, individuals came, and we collectively faced that crisis and solved it. There's no reason why we are not going to solve this one. At one time, we had the presidential post annulled by the Supreme Court. Everybody was wondering what is going to happen. We overcame that one. We had the oil crisis of 1973 and a global crisis of 2008. So I have no doubt that this is a very resilient country. I have no doubt the Kenyan individuals, the Kenyan companies, the Kenyan government have the stamina and the ability to solve this crisis. And what I want us to do as Kenyans is, why don't we build on our success so that we overcome this crisis? Mr. Njeru came and talked about the good old days. I think there's no reason why we cannot stop talking about the good old days so that my children and grandchildren will live a better life than me. I want you to join me, all Kenyans and non-Kenyans, in preaching optimism. I am an optimist, and I believe the economy is not good, but I believe it can only get better. Please join me in being an optimist. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much for putting that into context. Now that we get an understanding of what the economy is currently going through, you know, from inflation down to the debt crisis, and let's not go to the taxation part, because I believe there are so many people here who would get so emotional when we start talking about taxation. But let's look at the reality on the ground, because while we are talking about the fact that we are in a better place than we were last year, we also need to be as realistic as we can in terms of moving the economy forward. Kwame started the conversation by taking us through exactly why we are seeing the cost of fuel going up and also the cost of food commodities. And we have also seen the fact that over the past couple of months, nearly everything in terms of the cost of living seems to have taken the upward trajectory. But given the fact that we either way need to move forward, I'm sure you've heard this saying, still we move, right? But economically speaking, there are certain aspects that I think our economy can get right, will get right, and should get right. And I would like to throw this back to our panelists, and probably Honorable Ndindi Nyoro, you can kick us off on this one. And because also you do chair the Budget and Appropriation Committee, probably you can break it down for us. What do we need to do for our economy to stabilize and start to feed the people who we are calling the hustlers with our transformation agenda?
Thank you very much, Joy, again. That's a question that needs a week to answer, because basically we are talking about all the interventions that we need to do to make Kenya a better place. And most of the time when I attend such an interview, I actually don't come to defend any side. I come so that we try to look for a solution. Because whichever seat you have now here, or in leadership, whether in government or otherwise, you are a Kenyan. And a much better Kenya is better for a president, the leader of opposition, and everyone else in between. And therefore, I come with my thoughts in that regard. And I want to break it down into two things, Joy, because however much we may try to run away from parameters of the economy, we go around and we get ourselves there. Because there are standard ways of measuring whether an economy is doing well. And even if we say GDP is not eaten, unfortunately, that is the only way that measures the economy. And I want to look at it in two ways so that I give my thoughts on where we can improve. And I want to look, first of all, GDP in terms of the income side of it, and pinpoint where we could improve and what we are doing around there. And I want to look at GDP, number one, as a summation of our consumption as private people and investment, and also government itself as a consumer, and also imports and exports. Mostly in class we say C plus I plus G plus X minus M. And this makes sense beyond the X's and the M's and the rest. Because for an economy to grow, you have to grow the variables. One of the variables you have to grow is private consumption. But then private consumption is an element of private incomes. So people have to have money for an economy to grow, and especially when you want to grow an economy through that parameter. On the other side of investment, it is also robust, and also a parameter you can only measure through income and savings also. So to cut the long story short, I believe we have in terms of a lot to do, especially to cut the last part of what I talked about. The last part of imports and exports in Kenya has been negative for almost our entire existence. We must reverse that trend of having exorbitant imports in a situation where we have very little exports. And to do that, we are already doing, number one, is to substitute the imports that we usually have. And Joy, as I said, I'm trying to break down a very huge question so that I make sense of it. So to do that, you have to do import substitution. That is what we are doing in terms of food. Because however much we want to grow a very robust economy, we cannot pride ourselves in growing an economy where we are not even food secure. And therefore, on that front of import substitution, we have been more in terms of food. And currently, as you know, we are not likely to import maize, for example. We are doing all our best to grow all the other parameters around food. But I also want to touch the other side. It's a huge question also. The other side on what we could do to grow the economy. Kenya is stratified into three. And one of the issues that we are discussing today is part of it, in terms of IT and digital economy and all that. Kenya, number one strata and the base of our economy is what we call agriculture or primary production. Primary production in Kenya is agriculture, is mining, is fisheries, and everything that is around primary production. What are we doing around there? You already know. I don't want to talk about the points you usually talk about all the time. We all know about fertilizer subsidy, and we all know that our food in terms of production has greatly improved. The other point is on industry, because I want to stratify Kenya into three. That is primary production and secondary production and tertiary production. In terms of industry, we are actually much way behind in terms of Kenya, because we need to have done much more in terms of industry, because you create more quality jobs around that sector. And of course, lastly, is what we must do in the service sector, which is tertiary, and primarily what brought us here, because I see we have tied our theme today around the digital side of the economy and around the opportunities therein. Now, this is the paradox that we have to face as policymakers and as Kenyans. We must talk about production and productivity, because many times a country like Kenya focuses on labor-intensive production because we want to make every Kenyan part and parcel of the growth. But then you realize, this is the paradox, that most of the labor-intensive production has low productivity. If you look at Kenya as an economy, we project to have an economy of 16 trillion Kenya shillings by June of next year. That 16 trillion, the base, that is primary production, accounts for 18.2% of our GDP. And I want to go sequentially so that we see this paradox. The side of industry accounts for 16.8% of our GDP. Service accounts for 65% of our GDP. Now, this is the paradox. The primary production that accounts for around 18% of our GDP employs over 65% of our workforce and employs over 70% of the rural Kenya. So we must come to a point where we must distinguish the production we want to have and also the productivity. Because yet it is good to have all Kenyans working and having jobs. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we must create an environment where we also spur productivity per person. And I want to throw this question to you, Doreen,
yes,
in that regard. Maybe in a household of 10 people, 10 people who are able to work, your father earns 100,000 shillings. Would you rather have a family of a father earning 100,000 or a household of 10 each earning 15,000? I want you to do that math and all the other people here, so that we now try to unravel this paradox between having, yes, creating opportunities in labor intensive, but on the other side, these fresh graduates that we are having and people who are can be very productive given an opportunity, mm-hmm, also playing a part in these highly productive areas. Because across the world, the tertiary side is more productive, but unfortunately, it doesn't create as many jobs.
Okay, to answer your question real quick, I would say, because 15,000 is not taxed in Kenya, so I would say 10 people earning 15,000 tax-free. But if it's one person and he has to be taxed earning 100,000 shillings, then that's going to bring it down to even way less. So, but then at the end of the day, we all want, or we all prefer that every Kenyan has food that they're putting on the table, no matter the kind of background they have, whether or not they're the haves or the have-nots. And so, Kwame, I'd like to come to you next, because we are looking at some of the aspects that Honorable Ndindi Nyoro talked about and how we can use the different sectors to drive economic development. But I want to really stick much more on technology and how we can leverage it to also boost economic development. During her remarks, Honorable Mercy Njau talked about technology as an enabler, technology as a catalyst, technology as an anchor into other economies. How can we leverage this from the MSc level all the way to the fully established enterprises?
Okay, so let me start with I think this part of this conversation was about leapfrogging. And unfortunately, history shows that leapfrogging is the exception and not the norm. If you're a student of history, of economic history and growth, this is how history goes. I'll come to your question. I just wanted us to make sure that we level with this. One, up to and until the Industrial Revolution started, most societies and lifestyles and the quality of life was everywhere poor. There were no rich, there were no poor people. Well, there were kingdoms and there were empires, but the king was poor, was very rich, and his people were very poor. And that was all over the world. And then comes the Industrial Revolution. Some parts, of course, the island of England, but some parts of Europe started to pull away from other parts of the world because we were putting in technology into that. And then obviously that has transited. So basically, for a student of the history of economics, this is how it changes. Society starts from primary production, which is mostly agricultural and all those extractive industries. And then you develop industry, which means technology and education starts to pay off. And then from that, you go into services. So that in a place like the US is the world's largest exporter of agricultural goods. People don't know that. But in their national numbers for employment, the number of people employed in agriculture is so small that they don't even record it. It's bunched up with many other things because most of it is technology driven. So it comes back now to technology and all that. And that technology is not technology that develops by itself. It's technology on the back of science, which is supported by the huge universities and intellectual capability that the US has. So that's the theory. So you have to be careful telling a country like Kenya to leapfrog. Let me tell you this. If you go to the National Bureau of Statistics and they publish fantastic data for Kenya, I always plug them because they were good friends. They enable me to do my job and do it well. One of the things that you will realize about Kenya is 13.1% of Kenyans, right, have no form of formal schooling at all. 13.1%. The number of Kenyans who've completed high school is 12.6%. Ladies and gentlemen, 60 years after Kenya was born, granted we were born in bad circumstances, and Kenya is itself, that we are here is a miracle because we were the last of East African countries to gain our independence, and we are still leaders. I mean, even if we are leading by a couple $100 per person per year. But what I'm trying to tell you here is there are more Kenyans who never went to school than finished high school. That's a development problem. So against that question, I am very circumspect when we start to talk about things such as leapfrogging. Regardless of that, we have fantastic opportunities, especially for Kenya, because one of Kenya's major advantages, I mean, you might talk about it one way or the other, is that it has comparatively on the African continent very high human capital. Because this society decided at independence that we had three enemies, right? Ignorance, poverty, and disease. And ignorance was public investment in. So I keep telling people to shock them. Among the things that Kenyans should celebrate, and we have a few things to be ashamed of, but the things to celebrate is the fact that the Teachers Service Commission is the largest employer in sub-Saharan Africa outside Nigeria and South Africa. And that tells you something about what government thinks about education and its transformative role. So if we put those here, there. So I'm reluctant to think that when you have more people who didn't go to school than finished high school, that you should be talking leapfrogging. Maybe you should. Maybe you should. But it will be a small window, as Ndindi Nyoro mentioned, because so let's say the biggest company in Eastern Central Africa is called Safaricom. The number of employees in Safaricom is less than 10,000. Less than 10,000. So I think an economy will need to be diversified, and digital transformation has its place. But first, we have to get Kenyans from working in farms to actually improve their productivity in that farms, and over time, as economic history tells us, to push them from those farms into manufacturing and other enterprises. And obviously, for those who are in high school and university, they'll get into those enterprises, small and micro enterprises that deal with the digital world. So I've gone round and round about it, but I'm talking about the fact that if we do the diagnosis right, we can get the solutions well. But I am particularly suspicious of buzzwords such as leapfrogging. Thank you.
All right, thanks Kwame for putting that quite clearly. Prof, I want to come to you now because, we are talking about job creation, but at the same time we're talking about the areas that we need to invest in the most. How do you think we can raise Kenya's potential in terms of readying not just the young population that we do have for the job market, but also to spur growth and increase the opportunity for jobs? And I know that while Kwame has said that before we can even talk about technology and leapfrogging, we need to talk about the other basics that we need to get right. So how do we make sure that Kenya is able to raise her potential for us to be able to spur growth and also create an opportunity for job creation?
That's an interesting question, but let me agree with my colleague a bit, Kwame, that leapfrogging is possible. I know it is an exception in economic history, but it is very possible. Because I think China was able to leapfrog, Japan was able to leapfrog, Korea was able to leapfrog. So we can also try. It might be an exception, but we can also try and leapfrog.
Which Korea?
South Korea, not North Korea. I think the big question you have asked is how we can create more opportunities for growth, and particularly for the youth. And in most of my life, I've always dealt with the youth. Some of them are here as my students. And one of the things that worries me in this country and other countries is when we see the youth as a problem. In fact, in a country like Japan, a country like a number of European countries, they are worried because the population is not growing. And by extension, they don't have the youth. And by extension, they don't have people to work. So we should see the youth as an opportunity. But the question is, how do we make use of the youth? How do we exploit them, not to make sure that we get dividends, economic dividends from them? And one of the best opportunities to make youth productive and take care of the future of this country is to give them skills. And Kwame has put it very clearly. But what skills we give our youth? I like being a bit radical. Those of you who come from the University of Nairobi know that University of Nairobi has a lot of campuses. But there's one campus that I'm very particular about called Chiromo campus. We teach science and technology in Chiromo campus. Very green campus. If you go there, it's very quiet. But it is very unique in a certain way. It is the only campus where you find a substantial number of Asian students. You don't find them at main campus. You don't find them at other campuses. And I also ask my students, what are Asian students doing in main campus, in Chiromo campus? And you discover they are doing either computer science, they are doing medicine, they are doing pharmacy. You rarely meet an Asian who will tell you, I'm doing political science. I have nothing against political scientists. But what has happened over the years is that the Asian, particularly India, has invested a lot in science and technology. And you notice that those skills are transferable. If you did a degree in computer science, you can work in Kenya, you can work in Germany, you can work anywhere else. If you are a medical doctor, the skills are transferable globally. So one way to make our youth get jobs is to make sure that they have the right skills, the skills that are transferable globally. Number two is to make sure that they have work ethics. It's interesting that a lot of people want jobs, but they don't want to work. It is interesting a lot of people are very happy getting the money, but don't work for it. So we must give them skills, and two, we must change their work ethics. And number three, we must make our youth see the globe as their playground. How many of our youths would want to leave this country and go and look for jobs elsewhere? We see a lot of people coming from other parts of the world to come and work in Kenya, to come and invest in Kenya. A lot of youth in this country dream of going to the US or to Europe to go and work there. It's a good idea. But if you have transferable skills, if you see the world as your playground, there's no reason why we are not going to create jobs. But we also must encourage the youth. I always give my students a very simple example of Bill Gates. He started Microsoft when he was 19. And I asked them, how old are you? I'm 23. What job have you started? Zuckerberg was 23. So we must start seeing our youth as not as future job creators, but as current job creators. And we have to encourage them, either as professors, as their parents, as their mentors, or whoever they are. And if we can create those opportunities, change their mental outlook, there's no way we cannot create jobs for them. In fact, the youth are the best job creators because they're not tied to any ideology. They can take any risk because if I'm a youth and I create a job and I fail, my mother will not chase me away from home or my dad. So I think those are the few observations I see as the avenues to creating jobs for the youth and making them job creators.
All right, thank you so much. Honorable Ndindino, I'm coming back to you, but I want to open this up to the audience, and we're going to take maybe 2 questions from the audience before we can come back here, and then we will be able to take their closing remarks, because I understand the Honorable needs to rush back to Parliament. So 1 question, okay, let's make them 3 real quick questions. 1 here, 2, and 3, second row, right there. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Joy, and to the panelists as well. My name is CPA Irene Mayaka, Member of Parliament in Kenya. And my question, I have 2 very quick questions. Number 1, it's on the issue of leapfrogging and how we can then link up the 2, because the world is moving from the 4th industrial revolution to the 5th. We are still struggling around the 4th, and we've spoken a lot about us being an agricultural country. So how are we going to link that? Why do we not even have drone technology in our large farming spaces so that we quickly then link the 2? And then the second question, I just want, and especially my colleague Honorable Ndindino, to just tell us which part of the economy is really working. Because how I look at it is the way you measure whether an economy is working or not is when you look at our treasury bills and treasury bonds, it's not working there. Our inflation has gone up in a space of 1 month. The CBK lending rate has gone up. Our taxes are moving from bottom to up. We're in a space where, as a country, we'll soon even start getting.
We can do it because at where we are now, to reach where other progressive economies are, we cannot be normal. We cannot grow normally. So we have to find a way to jump some levels to reach there. And other countries did so. Professor alluded to that, and I believe it's possible. But this is the catch. As we talk about technology, many times we confuse technology and IT. Technology is not majorly IT per se. Technology is anything that makes production more efficient. Even a tractor is a technology if you compare with a djembe. Even a matatu is technology compared to walking or a bicycle. So you have to look at it that way. But then, in an economy that grows, you have to understand one thing that is very critical. We cannot grow technology in isolation of agri. Because once you grow technology, when you are not growing other labor-intensive sectors, what you do is to grow an unequal society. Technology in an area where there is no absorption, there is no enough demand for that technology, and there is no enough demand for the production of that technology, what technology does is to create inequalities. Because you have a few efficient farms making super profits, but on the other side, many people disenfranchised out of not having jobs. But my personal view is actually usually protect. Protect meaning, I would rather have production being by machines than we get universal income. So I am somewhere in between there, so that we are able to adopt technology, because Kenya is not a closed economy. If we don't adopt technology, it doesn't mean it's not getting adopted. It will get adopted, then we'll keep on lagging behind. Which side of the economy is working? The side of the economy, and especially using the jargons I used before, using agriculture or GDP as a summation of agriculture plus industry plus service, the number 1 area that is working very efficiently in Kenya is service. And service incorporates banking, insurance. When you're using M-Pesa, you are using a service. For example, it incorporates tourism. In regards to that sector, comparative to the region and even in Africa, Kenya is an outlier for sure. It is doing very well. But then you've asked the sub-other question. Which other side of the economy is working using parameters? That is when you came up now in terms of your question, referring to T-bills and boats. And I want to answer it this way. I want to answer the question of interest rates and foreign exchange at the same line. We have central bank and we have central banks across the world, including Federal Reserve. Their work is to make sure we have the right monetary policies. And then we have governments or executives. Their work is to craft working fiscal policies. The main work of a central bank, Fed or CBK, is to control prices. That is the only work they have, majorly, beyond regulating financial institutions. In terms of regulating prices, it is threefold. Their work is to regulate the prices of commodities, that is inflation. The other one is regulating the prices of money, which is interest rate. And the other price they regulate is the price of buying local currency, which is exchange rate. Now, in that regard, in regards to interest rate, and I don't want to delve too deep so that we don't get lost around there. Why is interest rates in Kenya the way they are? Because it has a multiplier effect to everything, including our debt. Cough, then we catch cold. How? If you look at our NSC, it is collapsing. The same is happening to Nigeria and every other place. Why? Many of the investments we get around Kenya, most of it is also foreign. So when you are a person making an investment decision, you are given in the US a fixed income return of 5%, for example, and you are given in Kenya of even 10%, you choose the US one because you don't have to deal with Forex. That's one. So the biggest contributor of the current downside of our interest rate, I would actually say, is the US. And it's not just Kenya. Secondly, the price of the currency, because it is part of the question you asked. Is the economy working in terms of our exchange rate? Allow me to answer that, then I give my other colleagues a chance also. Right. So I said about the work of a central bank, including CBK, is to regulate prices, including prices of our own money, vis-a-vis the money of other people, which is now the interest rate. Two things have happened in Kenya. One is the one that I alluded to in terms of the US. I don't need to repeat. The same effect in interest rate is cutting across, coming, and also into the Forex. But this is the major element, and we have to, I said when we come to such a panel, it's good we speak the truth so that we find a solution as Kenyans. Kenya runs a floating regime exchange rate in books. When you read about economies with a floating regime, Kenya is one of them. But then within a floating regime, you can have an independent floating regime, or you can also have a directed, a manipulated exchange rate regime. Mm-hmm. The truth of the matter, for the last 6 or so years, Kenya has been running a restricted floating exchange rate regime. What does that mean? Central bank, when they see our local currency is being decimated, they invoke some tools. You release dollars. That has also an effect in terms of our export cover. And if you check our export cover then and now, you'll see the difference of what I'm talking about. And sorry, I'm talking too fast, so that I don't take too much time, which I've already taken anyway.
Yes, you have.
Now, currently now, what the current governor decided, there is no parameter of an economy that you can hold on artificially for too long. He decided it is good that Kenya finds its bearing. And honestly, that is one of the reasons our currency is where it is. Mm-hmm. Then people are asking, you are just talking about the dollar, but Kenya is also losing against Uganda shilling and Tanzanian shilling. But unfortunately, that is not true, because you cannot look at it in a wrong period. Mm-hmm. If you check the trade of the Kenyan shilling against the Ugandan shilling and against the Tanzanian shilling, you'll find that we are at the same level we were 10 years ago, 7 years ago. The only gap that is different is the last 6 years. Why? Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much. There was a second hand came up there, and unfortunately, I'm going to request that we make these questions really brief so that we allow for the other sessions as well to not lag behind time. Okay, second question on this side. Yes, if probably someone could hand you the mic. If you're able to speak louder so we can pick your question. Second and third, we're going to take them in a row so we can respond.
Good morning, everybody. My question goes to Honorable Ndindi Nyoro and Dr. Iraki. My question to Honorable Ndindi Nyoro is, as a youth yourself, and I know you've been doing a lot of projects to encourage the youth, is there anything, or rather is there a plan for you to help the young innovators in Kenya to get a platform to display their ideas and also their projects if they have? Dr. Iraki, is there an intrigue in the university fraternity to encourage young people to become innovators in Kenya, and also a platform where they can actually come and display their ideas? Because this is well said and done, but there are young people around the country, some in very rural areas, with great ideas, but they have got no access to this sort of platforms. So what are you doing about it?
All right, thank you. Questions, please keep them brief, name and straight to the question.
My name is Bush. My question is to Honorable Ndindi Nyoro and Kwame Owino. Now, until yesterday, the most infamous policy of the fifth administration was punitive taxation, what you would rather call overtaxation. And we saw investors fleeing the country. Those investors had better qualified economists, and they advised the companies to flee. Yesterday, the fifth administration flagged off the nation along the path of total destruction by auctioning citizenship and selling citizen services. You could see the Gazette notice. Now, as a government that came into office in the name of the last man on the last line, don't you think this administration is deliberately and systematically condemning the last man on the last line to misery? And what is the government doing, or what is your committee doing to ensure that you give timely advice to the president before the economy comes to a complete halt? Now, Kwame,
I'm sorry.
The
question, please.
I want to,
the question,
okay.
Yes.
Mr. Kwame, as an economist, can you give us an estimation? Can you estimate the total amount of time, given these disastrous policies that are being implemented by the government? Can you estimate the total amount of time that is left for this economy to come to a grinding halt, or for this economy, or the policies that are necessary to resuscitate the economy that is now crawling to the grave? Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think we're going to take that many questions in the interest of time, because we're eating into the tea break and the next session as well. So if we might start with Professor Iraki, in terms of innovation in universities, are you scouting for innovators or supporting innovators outside there? Maybe I would like to request that our panelists also keep their responses really brief as we bring this to a close. Thanks.
I like being very brief, but let me comment one or two things about my colleague sitting next to me, about leapfrogging. I think we have a very good example of how we can leapfrog in this country. Most of the youth in this country have never used a telephone booth. You have never even seen one. Most of you have never used a Visa card. We use M-Pesa. So from using cash to using M-Pesa, from telephone booth to the normal mobile phones. And those are examples we can rely on to leapfrog. So it's a possibility. And I think the side of the economy that is working, I believe it is the digital economy. If you have been to other countries, in our neighboring countries and beyond, you realize that our digital economy is working. Mm-hmm. And the last one that is working very well is hustling. out of necessity, people have to have. So innovation. That's a very good question. We have done a lot of work in my university. I'm not talking about the University of Nairobi, but others can talk about their in innovation. For example, every year we have an innovation week. So if you're a young student, if you're even from outside the university, and you have an idea that you want to come and share with us, you can come and do that during Innovation Week. I also teach a course in innovations. So if you want to come for a graduate studies in my university, you can be my student. And we even use innovations as a part of promotion. So if you want to be promoted from one step to another, from maybe associate professor to professor and so on, we give deliberate points on patents or innovation. So you can talk to us, we can help you become an innovator. And I hope you are asking the question because you have an innovation. We can also talk about during tea time. I will suppose that you a cup of tea.
All right, thank you. Honorable Ndindi Nyoro, just before you give your thoughts, I'd like to pass the microphone on to Kwame, because I'm sure you're not going to respond in 2 minutes. So Kwame, over to you.
Two things. Leapfrogging is a very rare thing. Actually, in the last 60 or so years that we've spoken about, just about 10 countries have managed it, but they had very special conditions. Now, the point I was making was not necessarily that leapfrogging is impossible. It's an extremely difficult one. And it's going to be especially difficult for a country that does not use the technology of education. By as Ndindi Nyoro explained, technology is not necessarily an engineer thing of fixing or IT. I think the biggest technology is actually education, because it allows for all that innovation to occur all around. So investing in education is something I still support, and 60 years after independence, that actually it's a good bet. Coming down to the country, I mean, just like everybody else, I've worked for 16 years in Kenya. I mean, and everything I've worked for is in Kenya. So I'm not banking on a halt or a crash. Not that alone will not make it happen, but I'm not banking on it, because for me, this is it. Everything is in Kenya and stuff like that. And that's why I have to be circumspect when I speak to people who make decisions. I mean, because maybe they have options I don't have, and many Kenyans don't have options as well, so they've got to manage the country right. So the point is this, there's a series of things that are happening, and I think the government is very, very obsessed right now with making sure that the bottom doesn't fall off, which is a good thing. Paying public debts is required, not just because it's good practice, but actually Kenya's constitution does not contemplate a default, so that's a good thing. But I also think there are other low-hanging fruits that government could still, that we all together could think about. I think the support to farmers through fertilizers would be a good thing. I think as well government could have done a little better to expand the financial support that is given to low-income families so that they can continue to support their children in school and all that with some food before the harvest comes in, because I think it's going to be an extended effect for a minimum thing. I also think that within government opportunity, the government of Kenya has fantastic assets, manages them very poorly, but it has fantastic assets. And the reason, just like a household, I'm finishing here, every household manages assets. You have savings so that when there's a shock like what we have now, you can release those assets. So privatization, in my view, I know the government here is pussyfooting around it because it's a toxic political world in Kenya and it makes it difficult, but I think privatization is one of the options that's available. Finally, government has to do basics. There's no reason to run a meat factory if you cannot educate kids well. There isn't. Private sector in Kenya does that fantastically. And I'll conclude with this because we are celebrating Kenya. We at the Institute of Economic Affairs, we are the products of public education as well, many of us. With the exception of some university, most of my education was in high school and university education, with the exception of graduate school, was in public universities. So the power of education is real. Do you know that every single day, 16 million Kenyan children wake up and go to a public school, whether high school or primary school, high school, or early childhood education? That's an enormous power. In fact, it's the biggest footprint of government of Kenya's success, not SGR and certainly not the expressway. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Over to you, Honorable Ndindi Nyoro.
Let me start from Bush. He had given Kwame a very huge task to predict doom and gloom. Thank you very much, Bush, for that question. In fact, from where we sit, I like those kind of constructive criticism. When people are in government, you are your servants, and you are your servants. And you must always talk to us the way you are talking, like our boss. You talked about taxation, and without belaboring that point, Bush, Kenya, unfortunately, from where we all sit, is not one of the countries that are heavily taxed. What happened is that for the last 1 year, we could have introduced revenue-raising measures. But it doesn't mean that Kenya is actually a place that you'd call overtaxed. And as I said, the figures I quote are not mine. If you Google just now, you look at the revenue to GDP ratio of Kenya, is around 17% when we have already done the measures. If you check South Africa now, it is around 25% invested in those two areas. That education is currently mopping up 30% of our budget. In fact, precisely, in a budget of 3.74 trillion, 630 billion is going into education. All those are measures to make sure, yes, currently there could be bumps, but that child of a person in Kiadutu, where my father was living, or any other slum, have an opportunity in the next few years to be where we are seated. That is the reason we are investing a lot in education. To answer my sister in terms of tech and what we are doing, especially for the youth, I want to segment it in two ways. One, general youth, because we are all gifted in different areas. There are those who never got an opportunity to proceed in terms of formal education, and there are those who are pursuing careers and professions. Now, we are investing, number one, in terms of what I've said, education, but not just blindly. We are investing in education by tracking every shilling. That is why you see, for example, in our budget, we put money for basic education, but then because we don't want it to end there, we come and recraft now our tertiary education. Our tertiary education had bumps for the last few months since we told students to report. But you can check now, anyone here with a student who reported in any university, their money has already been paid. What about 55,000 learners will be going to our universities? There is school we are trying to do as government to give a back to the venture capitals and the PEs so that they can come invest in your ideas. You give them a stake so that you don't need to take a loan. So that ecosystem is the same ecosystem that made us
10 minutes. If you may, grab a cup of tea and come back into the room for us to have our next session. So we will be starting our next session in about, let's say, 10 minutes. At 11:30, we'd like to kick off our next session. And I would also like to make a special recognition to all the members of parliament and their representatives from both houses, and also to the first daughter, Charlene Ruto. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you all for making time and for being here for the morning session. Asante sana.